Right. Um, so the PLACE cohort, as Christine alluded to, stands for Plants and Climate Change Education, and the cohort is there are several. As it turns out, there are only 5, not 6, uh, but public gardens working on this. And just to give you an idea, let me, here's the original summary. The important points here is from the first paragraph is that it's free. It's for 10th grade students from the local area. And in the third paragraph, we're basically focusing on knowledge, action, and developing communication skills. And there it is, plants and climate change education. And as Christina said, the U.S. Botanic Garden, which is the oldest botanic garden in the United States, in Washington, D.C., the American Public Gardens Association, which represents 600 public gardens, and the cohort of 5 public gardens, of which the Botanic Garden, the Botanic Garden of the Piedmont here in Charlottesville is both the smallest and the youngest of those 5. And to start with, I thought I would basically, review, there it is, the mission of the Botanic Garden, basically 4 parts: to engage in nature, to inspire through plants, to advance sustainability, and to promote general well-being of humans and the environment. And the award basically allows us to do all parts of our mission in one, which is pretty neat. I'm not going to read this. This is for those of you who want to know all the little details. So I'm going to skip over that. And the main purpose is to maximize the impact of plant-centered climate change education. And when I applied for this award, I decided that I would ask in my application to focus on 10th grade students. And I'll talk about why in a moment. And I came up with a number of reasons. Number one, if you've been around 10th graders or 15-year-olds, you know that their emotional life and sense of personal justice is very strong. It's not gray, it's not shades, it's not okay, maybe later. It's black, it's white, it's this is wrong, this is right. And because of that, I didn't want to lose that feeling or put it aside as a way of gaining emotional maturity. For example, why don't you just grow up and you'll learn that you can't always do things the way you want. Because in the issue of climate change, I felt that this was really important, that we could do the opposite and use that vitality in the purpose of furthering the climate change education and action on climate change. So in order to do that, I didn't want to just talk about climate change or learn about climate change. I wanted to be able to give 15-year-olds tools that they could act now, not later, not when they're grown up, or after they go off to college, or after they get a job, or sometime in the indefinite future. I wanted to give them tools that they would be able to work with climate change as 15-year-olds. So the main purpose of this grant, as I wrote it, is to inspire a new generation of environmental advocates. Not just more knowledgeable, but more empowered. And so our program, as I've said, tries to empower teenagers because they've got such a big stake in the future of our planet. So 3 parts: knowledge, greater knowledge, as Christine can probably say, add on to when there's standards in school, whether it's next generation science standards or the Virginia standards of learning. They don't necessarily go into great depth about plants, and nor do they go into much depth about climate change. So one of the main focus areas of this program is knowledge. And then a second area is action. Well, what can they do with this knowledge? And so one of the projects we have is they're going to be able to work on a meadow garden and choose, based on their new knowledge, appropriate plants, native plants that would go in this meadow garden that would have maximum impact on carbon. I'm sorry about.
And the meadow garden is there at the Piedmont Botanical Garden?
Yes, it's going to be. It will be there. And then also the last one that I mentioned, communication skills. So here's a little bit more details on the focus areas and knowledge. Some of this you'll get. Some people will have these general knowledge that they'll know that, oh yeah, there is a water cycle. Oh, carbons, they're not so much carbon cycle or nitrogen. So these are the areas that we would be focusing more on. And again, this is I have 1 year to plan this and 1 year to carry it out. And students are also in school at the same time. So the amount of time that we'll be able to do this is limited. So some areas we'll choose, by the way we plan it, will be more important than others.
Oh, sorry, are you talking about field trips during the school day, or are you talking about after school or weekends, or?
Well, probably it will be after school. And I'm leaning more towards weekends just because I've interviewed a number of older teenagers and their ability to have both transportation, because 15-year-olds, at least young 15-year-olds, don't have the ability to drive themselves around. And since we want our goal, our ideal is to have 15-year-olds from more than one school, so we can't just go to a school. So we'll probably be looking more at something on the order of something in the fall, something in the winter, and something in the spring, maybe on a weekend. So 3 different weekends. So the last one might be when they actually install the meadow garden, for example.
So it would be one weekend in each season?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of right now.
Yeah, the reason what occurred to me is that certainly Saturdays and even Sundays sometimes for people that are engaged in sports is
right. Right.
You have a competitor.
Yeah, so that's one reason why, as part of the planning process, I'm talking to teachers and principals, and we'll see, we'll get some of those students won't be able to do it, or I'll try to pick those weekends that are less likely to be impacted by sports. And I know just from looking at the calendar so far that private schools and public schools calendars don't match up. So when one school is on a week-long vacation, the other school is in session. So things like that. One of the things that I'm constantly been told is that this is a pilot program. So, although my goal may be to have students from public, private, Charlottesville, Albemarle schools, what I actually achieve, and it's about 10 to 20 students, I may actually get more from one school and more from another. So I don't know yet what will happen. Those are my goals.
Yeah, Charlottesville
yes.
High School is within walking distance of the garden, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And
So
Albemarle's
if I
not
were-
that much further.
Well, Albemarle is definitely a drive away. So that would be fine so if I only did it for one school, then we could go to the school, for example. I've also talked to other programs, and there was this cohort idea of the U.S. Botanical Garden has been done once before, and another public garden, what they did was they had one big conference for teenagers across the entire state of New York, and it's sort of like something you may have heard of a program called Girls State or Boys State, which is focused on political, like civics, which lasts like 4 days, and it's usually in the summertime. So they had one way they got around that was to have, a single event. So there are a lot of options, and in some respects, excuse me, I'm trying to keep from coughing by having a cough syrup, cough drop in my mouth. It seems to be the best way. So one way around that is to be flexible, and so I'm at the point where I'm still figuring out how that will happen.
Well, Bruce, I found when I was trying to find academic advisors for speech clubs, speech and debate clubs, that all of the high schools have got websites.
Yep.
And those websites have like 100 different clubs.
Yep.
And so I would hope that whoever is the academic advisor to the environmental club might be able to help arrange transportation after school for a group. It would just be a van, for example, to come and then bring them back to the school where they could catch the late bus, for example, home.
Yeah.
But my other thought was when you started talking about this, the meadow thing, or when you started talking about giving them something they could actually do, I thought you were going to say start a meadow garden at their school grounds where they are.
I like that idea because the plan is when we do this pilot, the plan is that we would repeat this in the future. And certainly you can't just keep making a meadow garden at the botanical garden year after year. So I like the idea of making of that. I like that idea because it solves, it both gives, it does two things. One, you don't have to reinvent the wheel at the garden because you can't. And it also gives them, for example, if you did Charlottesville High School and Albemarle High School one year, then the next year you did two other high schools, each of those cohorts, if they're 15-year-olds, for the next 2 years, they're going to see something that they created. So their investment in what they've done is much greater and gives them a much greater sense of having created something. Whereas if it's off-site, it's less so. And that may be something that, we come up with in our analysis and after the fact that we say, we should have done this. But, I like the idea.
And I believe that planting and watching the things you plant grow has been shown to be therapeutic for people too.
Right. Yeah. So then there are all sorts of aspects to that where you need to, if we do the planting in March, then at least the students have a couple of months of seeing it before the end of the school year. And then is there a way that we can have students come back during the hardest part of the growing season, over the summer? Is there some way to invest in that caretaking? So those are areas that I haven't planned out yet, but I'm hoping as part of this cohort, what we do is we meet every month. And even though each public garden is doing something slightly different, for example, one public garden is doing something at one elementary school, and another public garden is doing something to create material for training teachers. And one of the things I like about our program is that, for example, the one with training teachers, you have no idea if that material will get used in the future, or how much, once you've created it, is how valuable it actually is. So my hope was actually working with teenagers. I mean, we saw with Greta Thunberg, one 16-year-old effect in worldwide. So my hope was, if we do 10 to 20, 15-year-olds in the central Virginia area, how much greater empowerment we could have in our region.
Could I just interrupt for a second, because we have at least two hands up.
Okay.
One is Christine, one is Tom's.
I've lost my screen. I'm going to stop sharing for the moment so I can see all, and I'll bring it back. There we go. Okay.
Okay, and I'm not sure whose hand was up
I
first.
think Tom was his hand that was
Go
first.
ahead, Tom.
Okay.
Go ahead.
If I have a comment and then a question. You may well be aware of this, but if not, I wanted to mention that about 2 years ago, the PEC paid for a consultant that works a lot with Resilient Virginia to do a risk analysis, a climate risk analysis for Albemarle County. It was a pretty big study. I think it was about $100,000 or something. And it produced a big volume that was sort of adopted by the Albemarle County Climate Action Program. And it has a lot of really detailed assessments of risks in various ways from climate change at a pretty small scale in Albemarle County. And it just occurred to me that it might be a resource for some of your students if they were interested in what are the climate risks in my neighborhood. And if you haven't seen it, I'd be happy to send you a link. It's up on the...
Yes.
Okay, so I'll send that. Great.
That'd be helpful. Thanks, Tom.
Sure. And the other is kind of a question, really, in terms of, because you mentioned you want to persuade them to climate action, and you talked about plants and promoting the idea of the value of plants. One of the things that we're hearing within the county is from the climate action staff. They note that sequestration by the open space forests and so on is really massive within the county. It's over half of our greenhouse gas emissions right now are sequestered. 60%. And when we talked to them at a meeting or two ago about their strategies to try to deal with all the new growth that's going on in the county, they said, well, protecting our rural area sequestration capacities is key. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people in the planning commission, staff, board, and elsewhere who don't really seem at the moment to appreciate how important that is. And I know in our group in recent months, we've talked about the importance of getting young people to come in and say, protect our future, don't trash the atmosphere. And part of that would be keep our open spaces open to sequester carbon. And would there be a possibility perhaps in your program or to either schedule or at least encourage some of the young students in it to think about coming down in front of the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors in one of their comment periods and say, please protect our forests and open spaces for climate?
Well, it's a little tricky. There's space, but I can't encourage them directly because of our nonprofit status. I've been told to be careful about leading the students to do a certain action. So everything that I've tried to create is give them knowledge, give them a chance to act, and then give them the skills to be effective. So that, then, the ideal educational environment would be that when I ask students to come up with ideas for reducing carbon, that I have tons of ideas that students could use. And what I'd rather have is to have all those ideas ready. So then if a student suggests something like, why doesn't the county have electric buses? Then we can turn them to, well, this study has been done and the county has this plan to buy one bus in 2024 and one more bus in 2027. I'm not getting the numbers necessarily correct. Then they can go to the planning commission or the board of supervisors, and I can support them to do that, but I can't bring them there and say we should do that. So there's it's a little hop.
I'll just leave it with, we think it would be great if some of them would do that. I'll put it there.
Yeah. Well, when I spoke to Ann Malik, she taught, I know her grandchildren.
Who knows what they are?
What's that? I spoke to Ann Malik, and she mentioned that how the Board of Supervisors knew nothing about climate change at some, I don't know what year this was, and that a school group came in and they basically did you have 3 minutes to speak, and they had like 8 or 10 students each sign up for 3 minutes consecutively. So by the time they were done, they had spoken for half an hour, and they had done it, so that they weren't just repeating each other. They had 10 different points. And I'm like, that's the way you would want your students to do it. And so anything I can do to support students so that they can do something really skillfully.
Her students do the same. I took both my students and she took her students to the conservation lobby day. So part of it was like, there are actions that you can take, including speaking to your representatives and letting them know how you feel. So I think there's a way of saying, like, that's part of advocacy. I never told them what to say, but I always said that's part of living in a democratic society, is that we have our elected officials and we have the opportunity we can have a voice. And these are your opportunities for having that voice. But one of the reasons I wanted to talk about Amy and her work is that, are you familiar with the Darden-Tow restoration project at Darden-Tow Park? Because she has worked with her students. She actually got a climate action grant from Albemarle County and from money from the Master Gardeners. But they are doing a restoration project with they're planting out a bunch of natives, and they did that this last summer. So I think that she might be a really great resource and a good person to talk to. If she's interested, she's in semi-retirement. And so I'd love to connect you with her. And I also put in the chat that I serve on the Albemarle County Advisory Committee for Environmental Sustainability. So if you need any connections, I've made several connections with some of the high school teachers. I know the environmental science teacher at Monticello High School. So I'm happy to help connect if you're interested in connecting to some of these teachers. And I don't know, it would be great if you could just have like the biology classes come over from Charlotte. I don't know if you've already pursued that or not, but even if it's a short, just have them walk over to help out. Anyhow, those were my thoughts, and happy to follow up with any other help or resources if you need connecting you with some of these people.
Thank you.
Peter, you have your hand up.
Peter's hand is up.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Tom said about looking at the Albemarle County resiliency information. As I recall, the #1 economic risk to the county is in the field of agriculture from climate change. So that should be emphasized, I think. Also, I noticed in your slide on the effects of climate change on plants that I don't think there was a mention of invasive species, invasive plant species, but that's, I think, a well-defined risk factor for climate change. And there's Blue Ridge Prism that could contribute information and might be willing to participate in a workshop, as well as I know there's a lab in the UVA Environmental Sciences Department, Howie Epstein,
Yep.
that does work on invasive plants and remote sensing of plant growth and plant health. And in fact, the General Assembly has taken note of his work on using drones to both monitor invasive species as well as to potentially treat invasive species. And that's the topic of invasive, or the issue of invasive plants, is going to be fairly prominent, according to my understanding, in the General Assembly this session. So you might want to look into that issue, invasive plants, and its relationship to climate change.
Thank you. I'm just
I just want to
Right on
make
the top of my
comment, Bruce.
Yeah.
Bill Espinosa. I don't mean to give legal advice to an organization that I'm obviously not representing, but in general, advocacy is passing on information, and also education and advocacy is almost always okay for a 501c3. What isn't is supporting one candidate over another. That's where you get in trouble. And in fact, a friend of mine in Montgomery County recently, it's 501c3 in there, and they had, as part of their program, had some of the students who were high school age make presentations to the County Board of Supervisors in Montgomery County. And I know that was, so I suspect at least it was pretty directed. It also had an environmental justice equity component in it, but I don't think there would be a problem. I mean, I think you shouldn't be too scared of running afoul of legal rules on this one. Certainly, you should check with the grantors, but just a comment. Secondly, aside from the school, probably the biggest weekend sports organization in this area is SOCA.
Mm-hmm.
They have a very, very large percentage of the youth in this area engaged in one program or another at different levels. I would give them a call about their scheduling. I haven't been involved with them in a number of years, but they're generally very helpful people. I'm sure they would. They may want you to do some meadow gardens just surrounding their fields too. The third thing is if you try to get advice in this community about what to do in your own garden, it's fairly expensive. And I would think that another possibility is maybe you can train these kids to become advisors, or to work with somebody who gives advice and make a little income out of it too.
So I can take a look and see if there's any more pages, and finish the share. Focus areas, we talked about that, because carbon sequestration. Just an emphasis on active over passive skills. Too many high school students go through high school and they learn how to write somewhat or nothing. So my goal, as much as possible in communication skills, is an engagement, so active skills. So for example, if they're going to decide to go through the county board of supervisors, that's a much more active skill than if they were to create a poster and present it. And one of the last things, it's a pilot program. We hope to learn a lot. I'm not planning to make mistakes, but I'm hoping that any mistakes I make, I'll learn from, and hoping to learn from others who've gone before. I've been doing a lot of research, and so, for example, these are just a wide-ranging group who have done a lot of work on climate change, everything from Yale to the National Park Service and U.S. national programs, as well as other gardens. Phipps, as conservatory, has been working on this for at least 5 years in great depth. And I even saw one which was an attempt to get people to think outside the box by having all these ideas related to climate change and trying to organize them in an emotional way. And result, one person I spoke to had done a study for her doctorate at Virginia Tech, where she's still working on her doctorate, which discovers that the most effective programs seem to be ones that don't shy away from calls to action in the National Park Service, where they actually, that seems to make it more likely that people will say that they're going to do something after the presentation than ones that try to be safe, play it safe. And that's me. And you've already got my information, so I'll stop sharing and see if there's any other questions. Otherwise, we've gone on way beyond 20 minutes. So,
Well, but I think it's been very worthwhile. And let me just ask another question. If people wanted to make advisory input to you as you go along, is there a way is there a way that they can hear where you are, what you're doing? Or should we just invite you back in a couple months? So.
There isn't an easy way to find out where I am. I'm happy to be invited back in a couple of months, and I can tell you where I am. I mean, the immediate stages right now, as part of the planning process, are contacting people so that, I can have students. So right now, the idea is to have students. So I need to be talking to teachers as much as possible. Like Christine was mentioning, a number of teachers, even retired teachers, to find out. And you mentioned, Bill, about SOCA, so that when I structure the program can be successful, that I don't hear from, well, we can't come this week. I'm sorry, you scheduled it. I don't want that to be a mistake. I'd rather the mistake be that we could have done more students or something like that. So yeah, feel free to invite me back, and probably in February. I won't know much more till the growing season, starts again.
Yeah, can I make a suggestion for our notes, which I'm not sure whether they're being fit into our regular notes, but to put sort of a headline asking for for teacher input from that, because that sounds like that's where you are and what is most valuable to you. Sort of have a block headline: teacher input requested.
You got it, boss.
Okay. Thank you. I know we probably kept you longer than you expected, but I really appreciate it. So
You're welcome.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you and good luck.
Thank
It's a
you.
great program.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.